During this presentation, I'll give a quick overview of CI/CD, present the tools available of AWS, and do a quick demo to show a few options of each tool. First things first, let's start with a brief overview of DevOps and CI/CD. DevOps is the union of people, processes, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. The definition by Donovan Brown from Microsoft touches the three pillars of DevOps: people, products, and processes. DevOps is often represented by the infinite loop, with the stages of the software development cycle from the conception of the features to the monitoring of the solution. The CI/CD are part of this process to help us deliver faster, using automation and take advantage of the benefits of cloud computing. Continuous integration is the ability to push code change to the main branch as often as possible. It involves code analysis, tests, and any other procedure to make sure that the code is good to be integrated to the main branch. Continuous deployment is the ability to deploy the change that was validated throughout all the stages of deployment pipeline. Now, let's jump into the AWS CI/CD tools. The tools offered by AWS for CI/CD are the following: Code Commit, Code Build, Code Artifact, Code Deploy, and Code Pipeline. Code Commit is the tool that you use to create and manage your private source code repositories. It uses the Git standard and can be seamlessly integrated with other Git-based tools like SourceTree. Code Build is where you build, test, and pack your code. Code Build servers are fully managed, scalable, and offers out-of-the-box pre-configured environments for the most popular languages. The Code Artifact allows you to create your own artifact manager where you can publish your created artifacts, such as C# library or a JavaScript package. You can also use upstream repositories, such as NuGet and NPM, to control external package usage. AWS CodePipeline is where you automate the deployments into environments, such as EC2 instances and on-prem services. Finally, CodePipeline is the orchestration tool, where you create the workflow that takes your code from the repository to the production environment, passing through all the stages and approvals required by your process. Let's see it in action. I will show a demo now where I will create a repository to host an Angular application and a pipeline to build and deploy this application to an AWS S3 bucket. For this demo, I previously created an S3 bucket to serve as a host, a website host for our application. So let's click here on the S3, and here's the bucket created, the Angular website AWS demo. So the things that I previously configured was to host as website, static website hosting for this bucket. And then we needed to give a permission, full access permission. We cannot block the access, so it needs to be public. And we need to create this bucket policy. Okay, now I will create the repository for the source code. So let's go to Code Commit. And on my list of repositories, I will click on the button Create Repository. I will simply give it a name for the repository. Let's call it Angular Website AWS. And put some description. This is the demo repository. Click on Create button, and that's it. The repository is created. Note that we are already on code. Let's go back to repositories. So we're going to see that our repository is empty. We just created that. It's important also to note that the connection to the repository is better done through the SSH. It's recommended to do it by this way. For this, you need to follow these steps to create an SSH key to attach to your account, that you're going to be connecting to the repository. I previously created this key and already configured my local machine. For the next step, let's create an Angular application. Here I have the Visual Studio Code with my terminal open. So to create my Angular application, I will use the command ng new and the name of the application. In this case, let's use Angular website AWS. The wizard will make some questions for the creation of the project. For example, if I want to use routing, what type of style sheets I want to use, and this is standard for the Angular application. So let me speed up the video a little bit. Okay, the application is created. So let me show here the source code files. All right, let's test this application. Make sure it's working. We use the ng-serve command. Oops, it seems I'm not on the right directory. Let's get into the application directory. And now we can use the ng-serve. This command will compile and put our application up and running locally on my computer. Let's wait a couple of seconds. And okay, it's running now. So to try the application, let's copy this URL, localhost on port 4200. So let me copy this link. Let's go to the web browser, open another tab, and go to this address. Great, our application is running. Just to make sure, let's go back to the source code. And here let's do a quick change on the application. Let's see, we have here the index file. We have the app component HTML. Let's scroll down a little bit. And let's find a place where we can do a quick change. Here on this title. So we say the title of the application is running, so let's put here, that's so cool. Let's save the application. And in Angular, as soon as I save, it's refreshed on the web page. So you can see here, Angular website AWS app is running. That's so cool. All right, so it's working. Okay, so now that we see that the application is working locally, let's push this code to the repository. Remember that our repository is still empty. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna come back here on the code commit, and we're gonna copy just the URL for the SSH connection to our repository. Let me copy this, go back to the terminal. Let's use the command git status just to see what's pending. So you see we had a file changed. And now I'm gonna use the command git remote add origin, and I'm gonna use the URL that I copied from the code commit. This is setting the repository destination for our code commit. I'm gonna add our files. I'm gonna do a commit with an initial message, and this commit is considering all the files. And finally, I'm gonna push these files to the repository with the command git push. Here note that is requesting a password, a passphrase. This passphrase is configured when you create the SSH keys for your account. So let's go back to the code commit, and we can see now that the code is uploaded on the service. All right, so now we have our code on our repository. Next step, we're gonna create a build project. The build project can be created during the creation of the pipeline, but let's create it first as it gets easier to understand. So let's go to the build and let's click build project. It's going to list the current projects that I have created. And let's click the button click build project to create a new project. Let's give it a name. So what about Angular website AWS build? I can put a description. Here I need to indicate where is the source code that I'm going to use. So the provider is CodeCommit, is where we are using our repository, and the repository is the Angular website AWS. The reference type is branch, and I'm going to use our master branch for that. This is the branch where the code will be pulled for use on the build process. So for our environment, we're going to select the operating system Ubuntu, and the runtime is standard. Let's use this image, the standard 3.0. Let's check the other options. Build specifications. Let's mark use a build spec file. I'm gonna tell you later why I'm gonna use this option. Let's go down to check the other options. Options for artifacts, for logs. Let's use the default. Okay, let's create build project. It takes just a few seconds. And it's done. The build project was created. So I can manually start the build clicking this button. I will not do that now because we need to create the build spec file. The build spec file contains the steps and the phases that the build project will use to create our environment to build our project. So back on our Angular application, we're going to put a new file here. We're going to create the file buildspec.yaml. This is the YAML standard file. And I already have copied here the file, so I don't need to type everything here. Let me just grab the information here and let me paste. Okay, so this is the build spec file. As you can see here, I have specific commands to prepare and to build my Angular application. So I'm using the npm to install the Angular CLI. I have the ng build to compile my application. I select the files I'm going to use. I use the base directory for the distribution package for the application. And okay, let's save the file. And I need to push that back to the repository. So let's add the new file that I created. Let's commit the file. This is committing the change. Let's put a description here. What about add build spec file? And finally, let's push it back to the repository. Once again, it's gonna ask for my SSH passphrase. And it's done. The repository is now updated. Just to be sure, let's go back to the repositories. Our repository, and we can see now there's a build spec file, buildspec.yaml file. Okay, so why don't we try to build the project? Let's go to a project. And let's start the build. Here we have the option to review the parameters, and we can override some information if required. But let's start the build. While the build is happening, we can see the build logs and check the commands being executed and the outcome of each command. This process will take a couple of minutes because the code build is provisioning the environment with all the dependencies required to build our code. So let me speed up the video. While it is executing the build, you see the status is in progress. And now we change for the success, which means that the code was successfully built. Let's take a quick look on the logs. So here we have all the commands and outcome of the commands. So in case if you have any issue, any error, the error message will be present on the logs. Now that we have our code on the repository and we have a build project, let's create our pipeline. Let's click the button Create Pipeline, and let's give a name for this pipeline. Let's put Angular website AWS pipeline. Click on Next. Let's configure where the source code will be coming from. So let's select our code commit, our repository, Angular website AWS. The branch, let's keep using master. We don't have any other branch. And for the change detection options, let's keep selected the CloudWatch events. What happens is that every time that I have a change on the repository, the pipeline will automatically be triggered. Let's click on next. Now it's time to configure the build. Let's select our code build. And let's select the project that we previously created, Angular website AWS build. Let's keep single build, click on next. And now is the deployment. So this application we're gonna deploy on the Amazon S3 bucket. So we have several options here. Let's select our S3 bucket. Let's select the bucket that we created, Angular website AWS demo. Let's mark this option, extract files before deploy. And let's click next. Let's review all the parameters that we use to create our pipeline and hit the button Create Pipeline. It's going to take just a few seconds to create the pipeline, but it's important to know that the first time that we create the pipeline, it's going to be executed. So you see that the source is in progress, which means that it's already executing. It's fetching the source code for the first time. And now is the build phase. We already know that the build phase takes a while, so let me fast forward the video. While our code is building, let me remind you that this is a very simple scenario. Note that we have only 3 steps: the source, the build, and the deployment. On a real case scenario, you could create more complex scenarios that can include code quality checks, automated tests, registration of containers, security checks, gateway approvals, and so on. Okay, now our build is complete. And we're going to see that our deployment is also successfully completed. So let's test it for the first time. First, let me close this window. This was pointing to our local host. And remember, we are hosting that on the Amazon S3 bucket. So let's go to our S3 services. Let's select the bucket that is hosting our website. Note that the files are now here on the bucket. Let's go to the properties, all the way down where we have our static website hosting, and we have a URL for this. Let's click here, and there we go. This is our application running from the S3 bucket. So in summary, we create application, we put on the repository, and we create a pipeline to deploy in an S3 bucket. Now let's do a change on the application and see how it works. Let's go back to the source code and let's do a quick change here. Let's change the title of the application. Let's put here my cool Angular app. Let's also go to the component HTML and let's change this message here. So why not? AWS is awesome. Let's save the files. Once again, we're gonna commit the change. Let's put some message here. It's important to use a message that makes sense, right, for the change we are applying. Change app title. And let's push that to repository. Don't forget SSH key. Okay, let's go back to our pipeline. Services, CodePipeline. and our pipeline is in progress. Why it's in progress? Because when we make a change to the repository, the pipeline is listening to the repository changes, and once it identifies a new file or a new change, it triggers the pipeline. Once again, let me speed up this build part. Let's do it a little bit faster now. In a couple of seconds, the build is done, the deployment is done with success. So let's go back to our application. Let's refresh the page. And now we see the new title, and AWS is awesome. Great.